Welcome back to the Spaniard Show. This is books number 1451. One Small Step Can Change Your Life, The Kaizen Way by Robert Maurer. So if you're listening via the podcast, this is the first time I say that because I'm also recording and I'll be uploading this video to YouTube. But this is the first time in 1451 books episodes here on the Spaniard Show that I'm going to talk about one book in one episode. I've spent as many as 15 episodes per book, condensed it down to 5 a couple years ago. I really want to grow the show. I think these books are as important as anything. I think reading is one of the most important habits or things that we can do as people. I want to grow the show, and growth is slow, very slow. So I've talked about possibly doing this in the past. It's something that I decided to do. I don't know where it'll go. I don't know if it'll stick, but I think it'll be cool to focus on one episode per book, kind of make it like a story, extract some of the main points, the main concepts, adapt it to your life, adapt it to my life, come out with some lessons. And then next Monday, I'll release another book in a single episode. I do want to say this: if you are listening via the podcast, to hop on to my YouTube channel, Charlie Spaniard, youtube.com/Charlie Spaniard. And you can watch the video here. I don't know if I'll get it edited or not in the future, but this book, visually, you can see it on the video. One Small Step Can Change Your Life, The Kaizen Way by Robert Maurer. So when I think of this book, the first thing I wrote down in my notes when I think of this book is small. Okay, because Kaizen is about small, manageable steps. It's about continuous improvement. I think of change, because the changes that you and I either want in our lives, have made in our lives, or will make in our lives are much better achieved through small steps. So combining that change with the small steps, improvement, because Kaizen in its simplest definition, kind of everyday definition, is continuous improvement. I first learned of this term years ago. A friend of mine, Andrew, if you're listening, he had mentioned it to me. I never knew it existed. The origin of Kaizen is kind of fascinating, which I'll go into here in a little bit. Consistent, because these small continuous improvements, they're consistent. They have to continue over time, or you're not going to reach that goal, or you're not going to make that change, both professionally and or personally. And then I have secret / the way, meaning that it's not really the secret. There's no one secret, but the idea here of consistency, small manageable steps, perseverance, keeping going. That's been a key to life that I've seen in general across basically all specters of my life, from my habits to anything I've ever accomplished in my life. It's been this consistency, and Kaizen is kind of the opposite of swallowing more than you can chew, taking off a big chunk and then gung ho for a little bit, and then boom, you stop. New Year's, it's January 13th as I'm recording this episode. And I'll have a quote here in a minute about New Year's resolutions, but it's the opposite of that. It's the opposite of saying, boom, I'm going to stop this 100%, or boom, I'm going to start this 100%. And it's these steps that when you read this book, that's the purpose of this show, is to get you to read these books, to spark your brain, spark your creativeness, spark your curiosity, spark your desire to learn, and then get the book. So when you read the book, you're going to notice, like, some of these steps, you're going to think to yourself, is this even real? This is way too easy. But that's the key to Kaizen, is making it so easy that it's essentially effortless. The chapters in the book, some of the chapters, to give you an idea how it's structured: small questions, small thoughts, small actions, small problems, small rewards, small moments. So it covers a wide variety of your life, my life, the things we go through, and really chunking it down. That's a concept, chunk it down, that I initially learned in the book Success Principles by Jack Canfield. But it came to my mind a lot during this book, because it's the kind of the same idea, but even more so, because chunk it down gives me the impression of, oh, it's small. Kaizen, this book, One Small Step Can Change Your Life, this is like super chunk it down. This is like chunk down. Quote: The average American makes the same resolution 10 years in a row without success. Within 4 months, 25% of resolutions are abandoned. I would have even thought that second stat was even more. But listen to that. The average American makes the same resolution 10 years in a row without success. So the change that you're maybe struggling, maybe desiring, maybe actually making right now, average American makes that same resolution 10 years in a row. I love New Year's. I'm not a person who really lacks with discipline or consistency. There are certainly areas in my life that I want to change. If you're watching the video, this thing right here, my phone, I say I would love to be on it less, but I guess if I really want to be on it less, I would make that choice. But that is an area, that is a thing that I can't just snap my fingers and control. There's other things that I've changed, like my consumption of soda. I used to drink a lot of Pepsi. My consumption of sugar and junk on a daily basis. Those are big changes. And I'll be specific on one of them because it practiced this Kaizen way, but it can be really hard to make change. And the idea of this book, what it can help you do, excuse me, what it can help you do is achieve that change through Kaizen, which is a strategy, is a concept. It's an idea of chunking it down into these really tiny, manageable steps that don't, and I'll get into the brain effect of big change versus small change here in a little bit, but it makes it much more doable. He quotes it in this book, Journey of 1,000 Miles starts with a single step. That's an idea that strongly aligns with Kaizen. It says, this book will show you how to harness the power of Kaizen using small steps to accomplish large goals. One of the definitions for Kaizen in this book is small steps for continual improvement. So if you think of Kaizen as continual improvement, continuous improvement, and then add in the small steps, that's a pretty solid definition of what Kaizen is. So the origin of Kaizen, when my buddy Andrew told me what Kaizen was, I think I made a quote or a post on Facebook one time, and he commented Kaizen and explained what it was. It's a Japanese concept. In my mind, from what I've learned and from what he had said, it's a Japanese business concept, right? So it's a popular concept within Japan, within the business industry that's also something that you and I can adapt to our daily lives. So I just assumed, okay, Japanese concept. I learned in this book, it's kind of mind-blowing, the origin of the concept of Kaizen. All right. So not the word Kaizen, but the origin of the concept of Kaizen, small steps for improvement, came onto the scene during World War II. So American manufacturers had to step up their production of military equipment for allies. And so I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but their Deming, I believe, was the last name. But there was this idea, or this concept created that, hey, to step up our production in manufacturing, we need to focus on small things that can help us improve bigly, right, or in a big manner over time. So this idea, this concept was created during World War II to help manufacturers create military supplies for our allies during World War II. Then that idea was introduced, I think it was General MacArthur, after World War II to Japan in order to rebuild their destroyed economy. So it was implemented first here, didn't have the name Kaizen, but the concept was implemented here in the US during World War II. Post World War II, it was implemented in Japan to help rebuild their economy. So the way I see that from the book and from my interpretation is we created an idea, or someone created an idea here in the US for manufacturing. Post the war, it was brought to Japan. Japan kind of took it and ran with it. That's my interpretation of it. I think it's a pretty sound interpretation of it. And to my knowledge, that's where Kaizen, in the book, the author says something to the effect of, when this was going on in the United States, it would become in another time Kaizen. So when it was implemented, this idea of small steps for continual improvement here in the US for manufacturing, it wasn't called Kaizen. It was just an idea. And then the Japanese, again, my interpretation is they ran with it and named it Kaizen. They leaned into it, to borrow another success principle. So why it works, why it works, and this is pretty fascinating. Have you ever just stop something cold turkey, start something cold turkey? It's New Year's. You're probably exercising 3 or 4 times a week. It's daunting and it's overwhelming, right? I have my phone in my hand. I'm going to put it away. I'm never going to touch it until 8 o'clock tonight. That's pretty daunting. But rather, if I say it's 9:47 a.m. as I'm recording this, rather if I say, all right, I'm not going to touch my phone until 9:55 a.m. That's 8 minutes. That's a lot more doable. Think of the psychological impact of that 8 o'clock tonight versus 8 minutes from now. That's a big, whew, I can do that. So there's actual mechanisms that work in your brain that create that fear and that angst of the big stuff and alleviates that fear and that angst from the little stuff. So a little bit of brain information here, which I'm certainly not an expert, learned it over the past several years. He reiterates it in this book. So our brain is actually comprised of 3 brains, and they're kind of evolutionary periods. We have the reptilian brain, we have the mammalian brain, and we have the cortex, neocortex, cerebral cortex, prefrontal cortex. There's all these different parts of that in and of itself. But my interpretation of that is basically as we evolved, our brains evolved. So it's the least human is the reptilian brain, and the most human is the cortex brain. So there's a thing in the midbrain, the mammalian brain, called the amygdala. It says you can often blame the midbrain for gumming up the works. So when you want to change, when you want to drink less soda, when you want to stop smoking cigarettes, when you want to exercise, when you want to 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, what is bothering me? Control your emotions more, whatever it is. When you're unable to do that, what I'm learning in the book and what I'm telling you now is that oftentimes you can blame the amygdala, that thing in the second brain, the mammalian brain, because within the amygdala is the fight or flight response. If you go back a long time as we're evolving into what we are now, the fight or flight was evolved to protect us for survival. So if something stressed us or we were afraid or we sensed danger, we would fight or flight because it enabled our survival. So what happens now is that, again, as per the book, that this fight or flight is in overdrive, that we're constantly in this state of stimulation, this state of stress, chronic stress. I've learned so much recently how vital stress is to our health, our immune system, but also just our health in general. So present day, it's that we're in this overdrive and our amygdala is on. You have a big challenge or a big change you want to make. You makes you uneasy in your stomach, brings on stress, anxiety. That's a boom, fight or flight. And that stops, that takes over, and that stops your cortex, your human thinking brain, your objective brain. One of the ways he puts it in the book, there's a nice little chart. It says large goal leads to fear, leads to access to the cortex being restricted, which leads to failure. So if you think big goal, something daunting, right? For me, it would be a fist fight. It'd be fighting Anthony Johnson on day 1 of my professional fighting career, right? I'm going to get sick of my stomach. I'm a fight or flight. I probably would have flighted. But the large goal creates fear, which then decreases or restricts access to your cortex, which is your thinking brain, which results in failure. So the idea that the brain mechanism behind Kaizen is a small goal means the fear is bypassed or the fear is dissipated or there is no fear. 8 minutes, I can stay on my phone for 8 minutes. There's no angst. 8 o'clock tonight. Well, that's like 10 hours from now. Angst, right? So small goal, the fear is bypassed. Again, this is charted out in the book. The cortex, the thinking Charlie, the thinking brain is engaged, and that leads to success. So you have big goal, exercise. I'm going to exercise every day for 365 days. Ooh. Fight or flight. I stop rationally thinking. I either fight, I flight, the fear, my thinking, boom, failure. Other way, I'm going to exercise for literally in the book. Some of the examples are walk in place for a minute a day, walk in place for a commercial, walk in place for every commercial of the show. It's so basic. And by making it so basic and so tiny, you can bring it down to make it much more manageable. It says, by asking small, gentle questions, we keep the fight or flight response in the off position. So again, that enables us to think through, that enables us to be rational, objective human beings. Some of this is my interpretation, my words, but I think you can get the idea. I want to go to a case study of change that I was able to make through Kaizen. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast, and it's something that seems kind of basic, but for me, it was a huge thing. Give you a little bit of a backstory. I grew up wrestling and I grew up drinking tea. So this is the memory I have. On Saturday mornings, we would get up early, 5:30, 6 o'clock, get ready for these wrestling tournaments, normally 30, 60 minutes driving, something like that. And my dad would make hot tea, Lipton tea bags, hot tea. And he would make this stuff, we called it illegal tea because it was really good and we would win. And my coach called it illegal tea. But it was just, standard tea with milk and sugar in it. So as I continue to grow up, I very regularly would drink tea in the morning. And I'm thinking like high school, later into high school, into college. So then when I started learning more about health and nutrition, I realized, wow, my intake of sugar is a lot because I would be putting like 3 solid teaspoons of sugar in a cup of tea. So it'd be the milk, the tea, the water, sugar, 3. And I would drink multiple in a day. So that was like 6, sometimes 9 teaspoons of sugar that I would be consuming in a day just through my tea intake, not even considering any other form of sugar intake. I thought, wow, I want to change this. I've got to change it and I want to change it. Also, I had a lot of cavities. So that was like a no-brainer. So I take those 3. This is how I did it. And this might even be a little bigger than the tiny steps he's talking about, but these small steps helped me change. So I went from 3, and this was over the span, honest to goodness, it was probably over the span of 6 months or a year that I changed this. And now if you're watching on the video, you can see my new Rocky coffee mug, but I transitioned to black coffee because black coffee is better for me than tea with a crap ton of sugar in it. But that was a long transition. So I went from 3 teaspoons of sugar to 2 teaspoons of sugar and 1 of honey. After time, I went from 2 and 1 to 2 sugars and or 1 sugar, 1 honey. And then I went to just honey. And then I went to black coffee. And the initiation of black coffee, that also has a nostalgic thing for me because my mom drinks black coffee, makes me think of her. But that transition from 3 sugars to black coffee wasn't stopping and then just one day and then drinking black coffee the next day. It was from 3 sugars to 2 sugars and 1 honey, and then 2 sugars, and then 1 sugar and 1 honey, and then it was honey, and then it was boom, I'm ready to start this thing because I had kind of dumbed down my appetite for sugar. That was a huge thing for me. Soda. I used to drink so much soda. And my brother gave this thing where he said, I just limit myself to 20 ounces of soda a week. And I was like, I think I can do that. So eventually I worked it down to 20 or less ounces of soda a week. Now I don't crave it at all, nor do I crave a sugar tea. I very much enjoy my black coffee, especially in my new Rocky mug. And my other favorite mug happiness is being a dad, but it brings me joy. But that change was so gradual and over such a long period of time. And that's the whole point of Kaizen. And to wrap this up and send you off, and hopefully to entice you to get this book, the link for this book, if you're listening on the podcast, it'll be down below in the show description. Not sure yet where I'm going to put it on YouTube, but it says people who struggle with Kaizen do so not because the steps are hard, but because they are easy. I'm not kidding. Some of the steps that he writes in this book, you will think, because I thought that's like silly. So if you're, a great example, he poses several examples, but a great example in the book is if you're trying to eat less junk or something like that, throw the last bite away or throw the first bite away. So that's it. So if you're going to eat an entire cake, throw the last bite of that cake away. That's step number one. Do that for a week, do that for a month, then throw two away. Do that for a week, do that for a month. Time, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because some things are more timely and important than others. If you're in a very precarious health situation, change sometimes has to be quick. But for a lot of things, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or a month, it's not a life or death thing. So you can kind of take your time. But that's the smallness of the steps that he talks about in this book. It says the challenge is to make the steps so small that it is effortless. So as a send off here, behavior change is hard. It's very hard, and it's requires work. But if you follow this practice, if you follow this strategy, Kaizen, if you get this book, One Small Step Can Change Your Life, you'll be able to do it a lot more. You'll be able to manage it a lot better. And I think that's the goal, is to not expect this drastic overnight change. That can happen. A lot of people quit things cold turkey. A lot of people quit smoking. A lot of people quit drinking. Boom. A lot of people start exercising. I hear that less, though, to be honest. It's hard. It requires effort, but it becomes a lot easier when you chunk it down. And that tea example for me, I know it seems like kind of minuscule. That was a huge deal for me, like a big deal for me, but it was doable because of that gradual change. So it's hard, but if you chunk it down, it's a lot more doable. And it doesn't have to be hard. It can be like not even a little bit hard. A few other books I want to throw at you before I wrap up here. Atomic Habits. That's a show I've covered here on the podcast in the past. Great book on the creating and or improving your habits. Very easy to comprehend, easy to understand, easy to implement as well. And then the other book, Irresistible, that also has to do that kind of directly relates to my cell phone example. But hope you enjoyed my take. Again, this is the first time I've spent one episode and covered an entire book. I plan to do that for at least the foreseeable future. This book, One Small Step Can Change Your Life, The Kaizen Way, by Robert Maurer. It's available if you're listening via audio on your podcast app. It's available down below in the description of the show. If you get your books, the books I talk about on this podcast, if you get them via the links that I put out, those are affiliate links. It helps support the show. I sincerely appreciate it. I love doing this show as much as I love doing anything. It brings me joy. I believe in books. I believe in knowledge. I believe in learning. I believe in its benefit to us as people, both health-wise, longevity-wise, communication-wise, just everything-wise. And the more you support this show, the more I'm able to do with this show and devote more of my time to the show to spread my love of learning in books. So thank you all for tuning in. If you're not yet already subscribed, please search out the Spaniard Show in your podcast app and or visit youtube.com/Charlie Spaniard to see these episodes. If you haven't yet left a review, please consider doing so. And remember, get these books. See you soon, folks.